welcome everyone for this special talk. As all of you know, we have a monthly workshop on urban issues, which is on the last Tuesday of every month. But those of us at the organization team in CPR are very privileged today to have Fayaz Ahmed Sheikh join us. Though his work is not strictly on urban issues, we feel like a lot of what he has to say today intersects with questions we're thinking about at this time when we're thinking about transformations in our country and transformations in cities in particular, and what the ecosystem of those transformations might be. So it's my privilege to welcome you, Fayaz, today to CPR.
Yeah, thank you.
Fayaz is from the School of Management in Zhejiang University. Before coming here, we've already had an hour-long discussion on what India can learn from China and how the ecosystems are so vastly different, etc. So Fayaz is a wealth of knowledge and also, I think, experience working in this area for many years now. And we'd like to hear from you. I think it might be best if we let him speak through his presentation first, and then we can sort of have a more intimate discussion.
Thank you, Mukta, for the sumptuous lunch we had together today and for the generous introduction. It's indeed an honor to be at CPR, one of the prestigious think tanks of India. I'm grateful to Asif, CPR, for importantly hosting a discussion on grassroots innovations. Very few organizations in India and abroad, they would like to have discussions and sessions on innovations which are not driven by profit and which are not driven by market. When I was invited for CPR and then I shared my invitation with my senior professors at China, at Zhejiang University, they're actually more excited about this discussion than I was, because I came to know that there is a strong linkage, knowledge partnership, there was between CPR and Zhejiang University, China. And Professor Xiaobo Wu, who is Director, National Institute of Innovation and Management, and Professor of Innovation and Strategic Management at Zhejiang University, and is heading our team. He has conveyed his special greetings to Dr. Partha and his colleagues at CPR. Thank you again. The title of today's discussion is Grassroots Innovation and Value Theory. It was basically, I think Asif had picked it up from my recent publication. It was a paper which was published by Oxford Development Studies. I think the title was influenced by that, but I actually won't limit my discussion about this grassroots innovation to value theory precisely. I'll actually try to go beyond value theory, and I'll connect it with the policy frameworks and the perspectives which we have been gained from the field. So I have divided my presentation in actually 5 parts. I'll try to be as brief as possible. The first part of the presentation would be why exactly should we talk about grassroots innovation and what's the need to discuss such non-formal innovations today. And the second would be how should we conceptualize and theorize such innovations, and what are the significance of these innovations in the annals of economic history. The third part would be, of course, the values that these innovations generate, and fourth part would be the policy point of view, like how can we scale up such innovation, or there is a need to scale up such innovations, and then we will have a little bit about discussions. So I'll take you to the first introduction part about it. Everyone talks about innovation these days. It's actually good when everybody, policymakers, politicians, academicians, so innovation has become a buzzword everywhere. Since the publication of Theory of Economic Development by Professor Schumpeter in 1911 to Professor Baumol, who published this Innovation Machine book in 2002, the whole narrative about innovation has been unmarket, that anything which creates value in the market or which gets exploited in the market, be it a new product, be it a new process, be it a new way of doing things, if it is being exploited in the market, it's bracketed as innovation. And this Schumpeterian understanding about innovation has dominated the whole mainstream innovation scholarship till now. And what has actually happened is, this market driven definition of innovation has influenced the policy making in various countries around the world. They have tried to gauge the significance of innovations using this market interpretation of innovation or Schumpeterian understanding of innovations. And as a result, the other non-compensated transactions-driven innovations, where market implementation is not a criteria, and the other non-formal innovations they have excluded from this ambit of understanding. So then what is the problem? Like, why should we talk about non-formal, non-market-driven innovations? You know, there are recent works by Professor Muzakato. She teaches innovation at UCL, London. And then we have another book by Professor Gordon, The Rise and Fall of American Growth. Of course, you know, these scholars and the scholars who work in who study innovations from the economic point of view, they have actually accepted that innovations have led to growth, affluence. You know, it's emerging as you know, the dividends of this competitive advantage which comes from innovation studies are well documented there. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, you know, innovations, the current models of innovation and the current growth models are being accused of perpetuating exclusion, widening inequality, you know, stagflation, climate change problems. And you know, the top-down hierarchical conceptualization and policymaking of innovation is also, you know, there. That's why the current growth models and the innovation models, particularly, scholars, they want a rethink, and they argue that these models look dysfunctional. Accordingly, I mean, that's not a very NGO type of argument or the development, you know, activists who want different models to be experimented. But, you know, there is a serious growing policy cry which encourage rethinking the whole direction of innovations. For example, United Nations, UNCTAD, they published a report in 2018. They argue that there is a need to experiment hybrid sustainable models of innovation which will take the sustainability issues into consideration, which will try to overcome the inequality which exists right now. And even the OECD, you know, OECD, that's the elite policy making of the world, and they're publishing this Oslo manual where they track the innovation growth and innovation health of different countries. Till 2018, they had taken the Schumpeterian definition of innovations while evaluating the innovation performance of various countries while framing policies. But post-2018, you know, there is a serious shift in their understanding of innovation. Now they move from market implementation to the usability, that anything which creates use value of any nature could be, you know, included into the ambit of innovations. This is at the developmental organization shift which is visible there, but at the same time, there are discourses about alternative forms of innovation like frugal innovations, grassroots innovation, independent innovation. So that scholarship is also emerging to overcome the problems which humans are currently experiencing. And in this whole discourse of, you know, exploring and examining and testing alternative forms of innovation, there's a growing academic attention towards grassroots innovation. If you look at the publication trajectory by going into Scopes and Web of Science, in 1997 there were very few papers exclusively attributed to examine the nuances of grassroots innovation, but now there's you know, the interest is actually growing enormously. And though grassroots innovation is a developing South phenomena, but most of the papers are emerging from the global North. And there are some universities in global South, they're also interested in examining the significance of grassroots innovation. But now the question is, like, what exactly is grassroots innovations and how to conceptualize this important innovation category. If we try to examine the literature which is there on grassroots innovation, there are some focus areas which could be discerned in the existing stream of literatures. For example, in Latin America, the literature on grassroots innovation, they talk about social technologies, how communities can co-create innovative solutions for the community. And in Europe, you know, mostly the innovation, so the literature, it talks about the sustainability issues, like how are the community grassroots initiatives which could resolve the sustainability-led issues. And in India and Africa, we have farmers' innovation, individual innovators. We term them as jugaad innovators or grassroots innovators. So or in Africa, we have the category of Juakali. So it's mostly the independent innovators who try to solve their own problems or try to solve a community problem. But there is other stream of literature who see grassroots innovations in terms of, innovations meant for liberation. For example, in South Korea or Cuba, or maybe in some other conflict-ridden areas, grassroots innovators or non-formal innovators, they have tried to subvert the status quo using their innovative pursuits. This, of course, this excessive focus about grassroots innovation in academic scholarship is, of course, a recent development. But if we take the characteristics of informal innovations into consideration, then there is a very clear distinction in the works of Adam Smith when he was writing The Wealth of Nations. He has categorized that innovation, there could be multiple sources for innovation. One could be men of speculation. In today's terminology, people who are engineers and who work in the fortified labs, they could be one source of innovators. But at the same time, the makers of the machine who actually make machines and are not, coming from that speculation category, they could also be innovators. And the second category of innovators, which are not working in laboratories, who are not connected to universities, is something we're actually interested in. The innovations done by farmers, artisans, individual innovators, or communities who do not get support from the society or community. Those innovations and those innovative pursuits we bracket in grassroots innovations. We did a book in 2015. It was a co-edited with Rutledge. And in that book, we tried to conceptualize these innovations as all individual and community innovative efforts, which not only solve localized problems, but also add value, both economic and non-economic value, to firms, manufacturing units, and the surrounding communities in which they are operating. Now comes the second part of the presentation, that's grassroots innovation in the annals of economic history. The question is it a new discourse? I mean, if we look at the scholarship, particularly the mainstream innovation scholarship, there is no trace of literature which will explicitly debate and discuss the nuances of grassroots innovation. So that gives us an indication that it's perhaps a new discourse which is emerging lately. But when we go into the economics, the economic history or the history of innovations, one gets the idea that the terminology is, of course, new. This grassroots innovation terminology is new, but the concept which actually where this grassroots innovation is based on is not really new. It's as old as human civilization itself, because rightly reflected by Moquet when he was writing The Gifts of Athena, the leading economic historian. He argued that before industrial revolution era, it was a world of engineering without mechanics, iron making without metallurgy, farming without soil science, mining without geology, water power without hydraulics. So that formal categorization was not there, but it doesn't mean that people were not innovating. People were innovating and devoid of being part of the universities or research institutions. So this informal innovative actions were taking place in every society and in every part of the world. And similarly, then Dr. Korer, he published this book, People's History of Science. He has basically documented in a very comprehensive way the individual innovative attempts which were undertaken by individuals and different communities across the world. And he empathetically documents the noteworthy contributions of hunter-gatherers, peasant farmers, sailors, miners, blacksmiths, folk healers, to the expansion of modern-day science and technology through a number of examples. And even before these seminal works, China was the first country to document the inventive individuals who had created innovative solutions within China. And then we have the 15th century historian from Italy, Polidoro. He started documenting these innovations in almost every part of the Europe. And even Professor Joseph Needham, in his encyclopedic volume, he had a lot of references to individual communities, individual and independent innovators who have been innovating different solutions, either to solve the community problems or to create the, overcome the problems which are created either by state or by the market itself. And during first industrial revolution, and the second and third industrial revolution, Mukir had actually documented the contribution of these informal, which we term them today, informal sector grassroots innovations, who were not part of the university or were not science-exposed individuals to the creation of first industrial and second industrial revolution. For example, James Watt, Richard Roberts had been called the most versatile mechanic of industrial revolution. John Mercer, he was actually elevated as Royal Society member, and he was not part of any university system. He was a self-taught guy. And even in the second industrial revolution, the Bessemer steel-making process of 1856, according to Mukir, was made by a man, by his own admission, had very limited knowledge of iron and metallurgy. And then we have this 2013 book on grassroots innovation by Professor Edmund Phelps. He was given Nobel Prize in 2006. He argued that, the first industrial revolution, science and scientism had not direct contribution to first industrial revolution. It was actually, there were people, individual innovators, independent innovators, who contributed enormously to the first and second industrial revolution. So if these individual innovators have contributed to first, second industrial revolution, or if these independent innovators who were not part of university system had created great solutions, but then once, as an innovation scholar, if you look at the mainstream innovation scholarship, their role is not reflected as clearly as it should have been. Now, we try to find out the reasons, like what reasons led to the undervaluation of this grassroots or non-formal innovations, which we call today. And we started, going back to the history and taking a multidisciplinary perspective, like what led to the undervaluation of this non-formal knowledge systems. And to our surprise, Professor Stephen Shapin, who in A Social History of Truth, it is an Oxford book, he argued that the gentlemanly constitution of scientific truth in 17th century England is explicitly grounded in the elite perspective. He argues that the birth of modern science occurred when gentlemen began to appropriate artisans' knowledge and started to systematize it. You know that elitism, the people who were close to the power structures and the people, the men of letters or the bourgeois people who had the power to define science and the power to define certain methodologies, according to Shapin, that was a practice which somehow contributed to the undervaluation of the knowledge which was created by invisible men, invisible communities. And then there have been other reasons as well, like political subjugation, colonialism. For example, in case of Korea, when Japan colonized Korea, there was an official policy that the knowledge which will be produced by Korea had to be, it should not be scaled up. And then the universal, the knowledge which was produced by Japan should attain that universal form. But as a response to that Japanese colonialism, there were informal innovators, grassroots innovators. They conceptualized different solutions, and they tried to upend the elitist narratives of the knowledge which Japan was trying to propagate. So these colonialism, imperialism, we know what happened to African knowledge systems, what happened to Indian knowledge systems during the colonization process. It somehow eroded the indigenous and local knowledge which was being practiced and which was being produced in colonies. There are other important reasons as well, like not only political subjugation or imperialism or the elitist or economic narratives, there are sociological issues as well which has led to the undervaluation of the knowledge which is being produced by subalterns and people at the peripheries. For example, caste is an important factor. There are some studies in India which have mentioned, not though in detail, but there are some slight references which have which gives us that window to see that caste issues have also led to the undervaluation of the knowledge which is produced by people coming from humble backgrounds. Or gender issues. While I was researching on Kashmiri Pashmina shawl in my state, Kashmir, I could see that gender dominance has also led to the undervaluation of the knowledge which is produced by women, and women were somehow excluded from important knowledge creation processes while manufacturing Pashmina shawls in Kashmir. And there are other reasons which were reflected by J.D. Bernal. He is a science historian, and a very beautiful poem which was written by Rabindranath Tagore who was given the first Nobel laureate from India, he had a very beautiful poem to summarize how the knowledge which is being produced at the peripheries by people who are not close to the power structures gets undervalued and gets excluded. His popular poem, I won't read the whole poem now, but I encourage you to, it's available on Google, The Discovery of Shoes. It's mentioned how a solution which was framed by a common man was not encouraged by the court pundits. So that poem actually describes and captures the essence of the argument which I'm trying to make here. And now is the part third of our presentation is grassroots innovation and the value debates. As I mentioned in my introduction, the mainstream innovation understanding is grounded in market implementation, scalability, and large-scale commercialization, thus overlooking the other significant human-centric values discussed in the value theory. When we define innovations in the mainstream innovation scholarship, so this implementation and exchange value becomes a very important component. Subsequently, innovations in the informal economy are often undermined due to their inability to generate exchange values. Based on our 10 years of ethnographic research in different parts of Jammu and Kashmir, we decided that we should actually move beyond this economic understanding of innovations. Our exchange value should not be the primary focus of our investigation. We should go beyond exchange value and market implementation and see what are the values that these innovations generate beyond economic value and exchange value. So we adopted a multidisciplinary understanding theoretical approach to see what exactly is value and how can we conceptualize value and how can we basically document the values that these non-formal innovations generate. This was the area of study where we started exploring innovations. The fieldwork was started in 2006. It was almost a 10-year ethnographic research in which we studied different innovations from Jammu and Kashmir. And after gathering insights from the innovators, there were some very interesting insights, like how innovations are conceptualized first, like whether the innovators want to go to the market, whether they want to get profit using their innovation, or there are some other motivations of their innovations. For example, this guy, Mushtaq Ahmad Dar, we produce a lot of walnuts in Kashmir, and it's a very manual way of breaking nuts. We don't have, we have not mechanized the process of breaking nuts in Kashmir. And this innovator, he saw her mother struggling with breaking nuts, and an idea of an idea of mechanizing the whole process came to his mind, and he invented this walnut cracking machine. His idea was not going to the market. He tried to go to the market later on when different organizations from India, like from Department of Science and Technology, they tried to show interest in the technology, but unfortunately, scaling up and commercializing a technology is again a very complex task, and unfortunately he has not been able to sell his innovation to the market or create that exchange value. But his innovation is actually creating a use value within the locality in which he has conceptualized the innovation and the surroundings in which he is trying to use his innovation. And the second innovator I met in Kashmir, I asked him, he has invented singing lantern. When I asked him the motivations for inventing singing lantern, the answer was very, very surprising. And there was Times of India, they have reported him. Basically, I'll read what Times of India has flagged in their press note. It's like Kashmiri farmer invents singing lantern. Tired of being found naked in his sleep every time soldiers searched his house during operations at the peak of militancy, Ghulam Muhammad Mir, a farmer with no formal education, struck an idea to escape his tribulation. Mr. Habibullah, Mir was habitual of sleeping without clothes. And basically he had the idea of he was sleeping without clothes every night, and sometimes army would come for search operations, and he had to face the embarrassment. He was caught sleeping naked. So then an idea of escaping this problem struck his mind. He developed a singing lantern, which would actually alarm him that if there is any movement outside his house, and there would be a buzz within the lantern, and he would get quickly ready and will wear clothes and will be waiting for the army or the police who would knock at his door. So that was the motivation. Motivation was not actually going to the market and amassing wealth by selling his technology. The motivation came from some different sources. And when I asked him why is he not going to the market, in fact, he got patent for his innovation as well. He tried, but the problem is, this innovation was not conceptualized for a community. It was an individual need. And the innovation was, he designed the prototype to meet the individual needs. And another guy, Abdur Rahman, he is, he has developed this Pashmina wheel. We basically spun Pashmina thread manually, and it takes a lot of time. It's a cumbersome job, very comprehensive and very complex. It takes almost 6 days to clean 100 grams of yarn. And then he thought of having an idea which will help his family to get rid of the kind of labor which goes into cleaning this Pashmina thread. These were some of the use values which we could get from these innovators. But the point was that most of the innovators which I studied in Jammu and Kashmir, the motivation was not going to the market or earning profit. The motivation was either to solve a particular problem which they encountered within their families, or a community problem which they encountered at the family level. And then after conceptualizing these ideas, there was the reciprocal exchange value. Like they started sharing their technicalities, their technologies, their innovations with the surrounding family. And it's like, the informal exchange which Poliani and Gibson and Graham talks about, that this informal reciprocity exchange, which is grounded in reciprocity, it's actually taking place. Most of the innovators, they want to share their technology with their neighborhood in order to maybe help their families, help their relatives, and they don't expect anything in return. But they know that the feedback which they get from the users or the community, that adds more value than the money if they sell their technology to the market. And then there are other values which we were able to document. For example, the intrinsic values. There was an interesting guy. He invented a local FM radio station in Kashmir. And when I asked him how he thought of inventing this local radio station, the answer was very surprising. He told me that once he was in a class and he was tinkering with the tools, he would always take some toolkits with him to the school. And one day his friend challenged him that, you are every day breaking these machines and creating new machines. I will only accept your ingenuity if you create a radio station for us. That time he was in class 6th, and it took him 6 years to work on a local FM radio station. He started working in Bricklin. He was getting money from Bricklin, and he was getting the spare parts from these local kabaddi shops. And then after 6 years, he was able to create a local FM station. And at the inauguration, when he had the local inaugural radio station ceremony, the chief guest was the guy, his classmate, who actually challenged him 6 years back, that if you can create a radio station for me, so prove your ingenuity. So market was completely not there. They have no idea about patents. They have no idea about economic returns. So either it could be to solve a local problem, or there could be some other intrinsic motivations of overcoming an intrinsic desire. The other values which we were able to document in detail were signatory values, environmental values, human well-being values. A detailed discussion about these values is flagged in philosophy, economics. We draw from philosophy and economics, and we try to apply the theoretical debates about value to these local innovations. And we could actually identify various human-centric values which these innovators actually create while conceptualizing and working on their innovations. And one important value was signatory value. Like, there's a good discussion about signatory value in philosophy, but there's a disconnect between the value debates and the innovation discourse. So we try to bridge that gap which we could discern between value debates and innovation discourse. For example, one innovator, this is a popular kettle in Kashmir. We call it smowar. It's a Russian word. We use it for boiling tea. It's a very traditional way of boiling tea. So we put charcoal in it. It's like cumbersome. You have to put a lot of flavor, and then there is always this threat, because if you put charcoal, it might get out and it might create damage, maybe may lead to fire as well. So one innovator, she has tried to fix an LPG cylinder with this samovar. So what it actually does is, when I asked her like what was the motivation for blending this new technology with the traditional one, and what was the need to create a blended solution, she said, she wants to preserve the tradition. Because it signifies certain values, it has some cultural significance, and she wants to, add the modern innovation of LPGs, a new innovation which we use in Kashmir. So she tried to create a blended solution exclusively for preserving the tradition. That was the motivation there. And then was the part for, there were other values which you could discern, and they're documented, and they're reflected in our Oxford paper in detail. If you would like to read that paper, it's available on website. The fourth part was the policy implication, like policy space for informal grassroots innovations towards bottom-up narrative. These themes, basically, when we were talking and interacting with our innovators, we could discern multiple themes from our ethnographic research. People and innovators, they would refer to different things, like patent was repeatedly coming up, commercialization was a part of discourse, feedback was there, and then the other discourse revolved around role of NIF, grassroots innovation augmentation, and how the scientists, formal scientists, look at their innovations, the interaction which takes place between formal and non-formal institutions and local forms of ingenuity. For example, patents. When I interacted with the local innovators, they had actually no idea of what exactly is patent. But it was only after NIF, National Innovation Foundation, that's a Department of Science and Technology organization, which is mandated with the task of scouting these innovations, and they're also trying to scale up these innovations. They're trying to connect them with the market. So it's because of their efforts that these innovators got a know-how about how patents work and how they function and what is the use of patents. And many innovators from Jammu and Kashmir, they have applied for patents, because of NIF efforts, and NIF is actually spending money to protect their ideas. But what happened is, this guy, his name is Abdul Rahman, he was perhaps the first guy from Srinagar who got patent in 1977 for a period of 14 years. We have patent number 146031 on 26th of March 1977 for an improved stove. He was asked when he got patent, he was an informal innovator. He had no idea, no exposure of university or engineering department. He was asked your idea is good, the prototype is working, and now you have been granted a patent, so it's better you go to the market. But he was coming from a very humble background. He doesn't have much money, because going to the market is, again, a very expensive process. It requires a lot of other complementary assets which are needed to commercialize an idea into the market. So he approached a local department in Kashmir in 1977. That was the local industrial department. And the local industrial department, they gave him a loan of 3,000 rupees so that this innovator could be successfully commercialized into the market. Of course, 3,000 rupees is a very small money. It was small then, it's now. So with 3,000 grant, you won't be able to take your idea to the market. So he tried, of course, undeniably he had to fail, and he failed. After a couple of months, the industries department, they approached the innovator, asking him to repay the loan which they had invested in the technology of Abdul Rahman. So Abdul Rahman responded that, look, I tried to take this technology to the market, but it was a small money, and I failed, and your money and my idea both have disappeared. So I won't be able to repay back your money. The industrial department, they filed a complaint against innovator, and the innovator has to spend a couple of days in the central jail of Kashmir. So that was the idea of patent. And then when I was talking to his son, he also expired a few months back. He said, when I was trying to see how he looks at patent, what's his understanding of patent, and I have put his conversation in verbatim. He told me that, why should we sell patent? I asked him, why don't you sell patent and get money? He said, why should we sell our patent? This is a lifelong certificate. It proves the innovative and marvelous skills of my late father. No one can ever try making a similar or improved stove. The patent was actually given for 14 years, but the innovator now thinks that it's actually a lifelong certificate, and it could give protection to the idea till they're alive. And he says that patent never expires. It's an all-time certificate given to the innovator. We never tried sold one unit of innovation, neither me or my father. We are very poor. We need more money to take this innovation to the market. So this is what happened with most of the innovators. They have got patent. They have applied for patent, but they don't know even that, they have to pay money to manage the patent. So this award system, this incentivization mechanism of giving patent and this appropriation mechanism of protecting local innovators' ideas using a patent looks flawed, at least in our cases. Then second was awards and recognition. The state talks about recognizing innovators. They have set up various mechanisms, various award systems of honoring these unsung and unheard oddballs from our communities. Of course, it's not a new culture. India hasn't done it for the first time. There is a long history of awards being given to the innovators. For example, Mokir has documented many innovators who were actually from informal sector. They were given membership in Royal Society of England as part of honoring their ingenuity and out-of-bound skills. And many innovators, similarly, we interviewed in Kashmir. They were given awards by different organizations. Local state has honored them. National organizations have honored them. Even President of India has appreciated them. And some of them, they spend quite a good time at Rashtrapati Bhavan with President of India, interacting with different scientists and different organizations in India. But what happened is when I asked them, like, are they satisfied with this kind of recognition which they're getting? Because, you are suddenly making a celebrity out of a common man. So I was very curious to see how they look at this kind of recognition which they get. And one of the innovator, I won't name him, he said that, he has got President Award, he's in the front page of the newspapers. In fact, I have profiled him for Times of India multiple times. He was in the front page of the newspapers, that there is a great solution coming from Kashmir. There are Kashmir Innovations. And then he was recognized by national organizations. He, in fact, got a chance to go out of country. And then I told him, like, how you look at this whole award system. He responded in negative. He said that, of course, it's good that state is honoring us, but there are some maladaptive features, associated with award system. He's arguing that, most of our innovations, they have not created economic value, that societal impact at a large scale. So they are still in the conceptualization phase. We're still working on prototypes. But the recognition has come to us as if we are celebrated innovators. Now, there is a burden on us to prove to the community that the awards which we have received, we rightly deserve those awards. And that's actually giving us more sleepless nights. We have the burden of proving to the communities and societies that, the award which we received, we rightly deserve those awards, and we have to actually create those, only successful solutions for the society. So that's actually, according to the innovators, creating more problems for them than honoring the awards. This is what his interview, I put it in verbatim here. And then there are other components when it comes to, formalizing or scaling up these innovations. There's a big debate whether we need to scale up such innovations or we should not touch them, or whether we should engage these communities for scaling up or not. For example, commercialization unit. One innovator, he invented walnut breaking machine. And that machine he conceptualized considering his local needs at home, because they were producing walnuts. It was around 60 or 100 kgs of walnuts they were producing, and he needed a machine which will break, which will break 100 kgs of nuts in their home. So he conceptualized that technology considering the local requirements. But then different organizations, they encouraged him to commercialize his technology, and they developed the technology, and he tried to sell a couple of units in Kashmir. But when the users, like the people who showed interest in technology, when they purchased a couple of units from the innovator, after a couple of days, using that innovation, the response was completely negative. They said that we need a big machine, which will break at least 500 kgs of nuts in a single day. And your machine is designed to meet the local needs. It's not meeting our requirements. So market requirements are completely different. And when innovators, they conceptualize their innovation, their requirements are altogether different. So without knowing the requirements, just pushing these innovation for commercialization actually will dampen the whole innovation pursuit. And the other is of feedback and standardization of these innovation. There are some broken links within these innovations. There is not a complete synergy between the universities, between the innovators, between the actors who are responsible for creating a suitable ecosystem to commercialize these innovations. And roll-up government is very important. For example, in Jammu and Kashmir, in 2009, I had a chance to meet the then Chief Minister of the state, Umar Abdullah, and I encouraged him to create a kind of incentive system for local innovators because I was documenting and profiling these innovators. And somehow, with a recommendation from 13th Financial Commissioner of India, Vijay Kelkar, and NIF, and because of our efforts, we created a pressure group within the state. And Umar Abdullah, they created an award system of some 9 lakh rupees for these local innovators, that every year these innovators will be recognized at a state level and cash reward will be given to them. But we don't know what happened. There was a budget money, it was allocated in the budget, and the budget was printed in the newspaper that there will be 6 lakh rupees or 9 lakh rupees for innovators, but no innovator was ever recognized, and nobody was given that money. We don't know what happened to that money and who got that award. And in fact, when National Innovation System was framed, which was headed by Sam Petroda, under that council, there was some money which was given to the states. And I had a chance to visit one DC of popular Deputy Commissioner of Kashmir. I asked him whether you had got some grant to support local innovations. He said, yeah, we have got a grant of 1 crore from the State Innovation Council or National Innovation Council. And I asked him, where have you invested? Who are the innovators who got benefited out of that grant? He said, we have completely taken that money and we have started constructing toilets using that innovation grant which was there for innovators. So those system linkages are not there. It's not a vibrant system, and it's completely a collapse of system. There are, innovator thinks on different lines. The university professor, they have a different interpretation of their innovations. And I visited the top universities of Kashmir, and I had a chance to interact with people at NIT Srinagar. I met some engineers. I asked them how you see these local ingenuity efforts, local technologies created by people outside your university. And they started laughing at these, innovative pursuits. They rightly dismissed them. They said, you can't have a guy, he can have a good stove, but he doesn't have the understanding of thermodynamics. So when he doesn't know thermodynamics, how can he claim that he's created an efficient stove with, which will actually guarantee maximum utilization of fuel? So they don't interact much with the innovators, and innovators, every time they go to the university, they outrightly dismiss their innovative pursuits. And in this whole system, I don't see any scope that these innovations can be scaled up. We are not saying that they should not be scaled up. Of course, if they are scaled up, of course, there will be some social goal, there will be some community benefits, but scaling up process, it needs completely, bottom-up approach. We need to engage with the innovators. We need to take their insights into consideration. It's not that, that hierarchical conceptualization and hierarchical understanding of innovation should be, actually discouraged. And I have put these 2 cases from China, Taobao and Pinduoduo. I was in China and I was actually impressed how China government with local innovators, Alibaba, and with the local governance body, they have identified and mapped different resource regions and how they're actually, encouraging local innovations. Public procurement for innovations is there. The government support is there. The government has crafted carefully the incentive mechanism for these local entrepreneurs and local innovators. And that's why I could see, the same innovation of walnut breaking machine in China being available at Taobao platform, selling thousands of units every day. And our innovation, which was conceptualized by our innovator in 2006, 18 years ago, is unable to sell a couple of units in the market. Because, that system vibrancy could be seen in China, while as in case of India, and particularly in our state, I couldn't see that vibrancy there. And I'll come to the conclusion part of it, what we get out of all this, these insights, and what we get from my interaction with these local innovators. I go back to Edmund Phelps. He's saying that the current innovation models, the growth models which we have, they are completely dysfunctional. if we want to create an innovative society, then it has to be collaborative. People have to invent at the grassroots level. And then he, in a book, Introduction, it was a book done by a Chinese professor, Yang Laure. He edited a book on Alibaba. And the foreword for that book was written by Edmund Phelps. He's at Columbia University now. And he mentioned there as well that, like, this ICT plus grassroots involvement of the people is actually creating impact which was created by general purpose technology like steam engine in first industrial revolution. So he is arguing that unless we don't involve people at the grassroots, in the innovation pursuits, all top-down models of innovation will not be sustainable, and they will continue, perpetuating inequality and exclusion. And that's why the old hackneyed top-down bureaucratic models need to be dismantled. I'm not saying we should completely dismantle them or we will be able to dismantle them, but we need to create, if we're claiming to go for innovation pursuits, then we have to invent something, new models whereby people's ingenuity, where grassroots solutions, while local innovations could be scaled up, where innovators' dignity will be recognized, where his authority will not be challenged, where his ingenuity won't be dismissed. And value of innovation, while framing the policies at the national level, economic value should not basically hijack the whole policy agenda. And this is what we have seen in case of India. When in 2013, Government of India launched a national innovation policy, I was shocked, 80% of the people in India, they work in informal economy. And a lot of innovations happen in informal economy. But if you look at the innovation policy of India, there's not a single mention of informal economy or informal innovation or grassroots innovations. When India is the only country which has documented more than 200,000 grassroots innovations at Department of Science and Technology through NIF. And India is the only country where informal innovators are being hosted by President of India every year. But if you look at their innovation policy, it doesn't talk about local innovations and local ingenuity. So there is a complete mismatch between what policymakers think and what people think and what exactly is the reality. And so is the case in Africa. A lot of informal innovations, informal economy is vibrant there. If you look at their African Union innovation policy or Bogota manual, they don't talk about non-Schumpeterian innovation. These policies, these policy manuals, these policy roadmaps are guided, again, by market, capitalist agendas. Profit maximization is at the heart of these discourses. So I think if we have to frame more policies, we need to give a rethink, and we need to move beyond economic value. I mean, through our cases, it was revealed to us that, if innovations are not creating economic value, but there are some other equally important values which these innovations create, and thereby they're contributing to the society. So we have to take those social and pro-human-centric and pro-environmental values into consideration while framing new policies. And proper incentives has to be crafted. Like, as I mentioned, giving awards without understanding the innovator's perspective, or without taking his point of view into consideration, could be a problem, a burden for the innovator. Or maybe, for example, giving patent to the innovator doesn't make any sense, because, of course, patent might work in a different setting, but when it comes to informal economy, it doesn't contribute anything. Neither it appropriates knowledge, neither it protects knowledge, or it gives any value to them. Of course, I'm not saying that we should completely dismiss patent mechanism, or I'm not against patents, but what I'm saying is, we can think of creating maybe a sui generis protection mechanism which is available there. For example, in Kashmiri shawls is a good example. Government of India, they came up with GI, geographical indication. But when you talk to the local people whether GI has protected or has created any kind of advantage for the people who are engaged in Pashmina shawl making, the answer is very negative. They're saying it has neither protected the shawl nor it has created any kind of economic impact. And then when I asked them what could be the solution, they're saying that we have better solutions than GI. Let government allow us to explore our way of protecting and upscaling and creating appropriation mechanism tools. So government has to actually engage with these communities, with these innovators, while framing policies and creating proper mechanisms for that. And also, in order to create a proper discourse around these innovations, non-formal innovations, I think history writing is very important, because we have seen the romantic narratives of history, which are guided and dominated by power relations, have excluded the contributions of the common man, the people at the peripheries. I think if we want to create a proper narrative around these innovations, power and history has to be disassociated and separated. And lastly, I mean, why we should talk about these non-formal innovations and why should we discuss them? I think in policy discourses and even in academic scholarship, I think I get inspiration from this, from Whangarei Matai, who is the first woman Nobel Prize from Africa. This you can read. Today we are faced with a challenge that calls for a shift in our thinking so that humanity stops threatening its life support system. We are called to assist the earth to heal her wounds and in the process heal our own. Indeed, to embrace the whole of creation in its all diversity, beauty, wonder, recognizing that sustainable development, democracy, and peace are invisible is an idea whose time has come. I think we need to rethink the current growth and innovation models and give recognition to different forms and alternative forms of thinking. And I'm sure once we start recognizing that, we'll be able to create a sustainable future, which will benefit us all. Thank you very much.